Hello and welcome. Hi, I'm Dave. This tutorial is part of a beginner's CSS series. I'll be using the Chrome web browser, the Visual Studio Code editor, and the live server extension for Visual Studio Code to view the web page. There are links to these tools, starter code files, and all resources in the description below. Today we'll use CSS to apply responsive web design as we create profile cards for the staff of a small company. It's time for another CSS mini project, and we'll be applying many of the concepts we've learned from previous lessons in this CSS for Beginners tutorial series. Let's look at our finished project first. This is our end goal. I've already got DevTools open. I'm already showing the toolbar at the top, and you can click the little mobile icon at the top of Chrome DevTools to toggle that device toolbar. And if you click the three dots, you can also show or hide the device frame if it's available. And it is available for the iPhone 5/SE, which is currently probably the smallest mobile device we would design for as of the making of this tutorial at least. And it's got 320 pixels width, 568 high, and you can see the project right here, and we can scroll through the cards for each employee. Now if we choose this drop menu and choose responsive, there you can see the page definitely changes. We can see all employees at once, and we see the new width and height at the top. Now we can type in here too, and I'm going to actually highlight the width and change it to 1920 by 1080, and we can see what our page would look like on a full 16 by 9 or 1920 by 1080 widescreen. So this is our end goal. I can grab the side now and squeeze the page back, and we can see how it adapts to each width all the way back to our 320 pixels. Of course, we've got more height than we did in the iPhone right now, but we can see how it adapts to all of these different sizes and changes as I drag it all the way back to above 1920 now. So now let's look at the code. Our starter code today is the finished code from the last lesson that we had on media queries, but don't worry if you don't have that, you can download it in the description, or I won't move so fast that you can't follow along and add the other styles. I will cover all of the styles. And as we see in the file tree over here, we've got a notes.md. In the last lesson we discussed breakpoints, and I included those. That's a markdown file. We have our index.html, but I've also added an image folder, img, and we see three different profile pictures here. So those are also available for download with the source code from GitHub. And here's our CSS once again. Let's make our changes to the HTML first because we need to add more here. So let's switch the title first from CSS Media Queries to CSS Mini-Project, and then put a colon, and we'll put let's do profile cards. Okay, now that we've changed our title, we can change more of the content. So instead of saying header here, we're going to say our staff. And then inside of the nav, we're going to put some other details instead of that H2. So let's just put links here, and we'll have an A with an href attribute, and we automatically get that in there. Now this is going to be an anchor tag. We can put the hashtag, and I'll put profile1, and we'll match that to an ID later. And here let's just put the first employee's name, so we'll say Joe. We're making a nav menu here. The next one we'll do the same, and actually I'll just go to this line and press Shift Alt and the down arrow to copy down twice, and that will save some time for sure. Okay, after I get rid of that line, I'm going to switch the profile to 2 and the next one to 3. And then after Joe, I believe we have Matt, and then we have Jane. So now we have our nav menu and our title for our staff page. Let's move on to the main element, and we can remove this H2 as well. And now we're going to add an article. And this article element will have an ID equal to profile of 1, and now inside the article we can put several things, but first let's also add a class and set that equal to card. There we go. Now inside the article, let's add a figure. And if you completed my HTML for Beginners course, you know we'll probably put an image inside the figure as well as a figure caption. So let's start with the image. And now we have a source attribute and an alt attribute. So for the source, we're going to look in the image folder, then put a slash, and now VS Code gives us the options of what we have in here. And we'll pick the profile picture. Now we'll also put the employee's name under the alt attribute. So there's Joe Coder. But then if you also remember our discussion in the images lesson, we need to put a width and a height. And this prevents a code layout shift, or I should say a page layout shift, or I believe the proper term is content layout shift. But as long as you get the concept that it already reserves that space in the browser, essentially. And I've got links to that in the description with all of the other resource links. Okay, so we have a width equal 500, and we're also going to have a height equal to 500. There we go. We need that on all images. Now let's go ahead and add the fig caption. And this fig caption is once again just going to be the employee's name. So now we have Joe Coder in the fig caption. And then underneath our figure is where we want to put, actually not underneath just the figure, this fig caption goes in. That's what I was doing wrong. The fig caption goes in the figure. There we go. Now underneath the figure, we're going to have a paragraph. But inside the paragraph, we want to use another element we haven't talked about before. We talked about how to add quotes with HTML entities and Unicode, but we didn't talk about how to add quotes just with the quote element itself. So I'd like to add that to this series, and hopefully your knowledge that you can also add quote symbols with the quote element. So here we put I code stuff. This is basically Joe's statement about what he does. Very simplified, but there we go for Joe. Okay, now that we've got the profile card HTML here, I'm going to highlight this and I'm going to copy it down twice with Shift Alt and the down arrow. So now we just need to make some changes for each one of these. So now it will be profile 2. We've changed both of those. The images are all the same, but the next one is going to be for Matt Designer. So let's highlight everywhere we had Joe Coder here. So 1, and then Control D to select the next one. We can put Matt Designer, and imagine instead of I code stuff, he's going to say I design stuff. And then the final employee, profile number 3, and really I can highlight 1 and press Control D to highlight it again and switch that to a 3 instead of Joe Coder. So I highlight that, Control D again. This is going to be Jane Devrel, for short for developer relations, of course, but we just put it as somebody's last name for what they do. And after that, here we want to put I teach stuff. Again, all oversimplifications of every job, but we just have a small example. Now I have Prettier enabled also, and notice it just wrapped all of these attributes down to different lines. If you don't like that, you don't have to use Prettier, or you can go to your VS Code extensions and you can search for Prettier, and then you can click on Prettier and install that, and it does some auto formatting, and I happen to have it enabled as I'm making this video. So that, when I saved, that is why you saw that auto formatting. It put each one of these attributes on a separate line, which is fine too. It still works out the same. Okay, we're finished with our main content. Let's just move down to the footer, where we're not going to say footer here, and we're not going to have an H2. So let's just put a paragraph, and inside this paragraph, now we'll use an HTML entity. We'll put and copy. It's an ampersand, the word copy, and then a semicolon, and that's the copyright symbol. And then we'll just say Acme Co. If you're a fan of the old Looney Tunes, this is the company that made all of the stuff for the Coyote. And now we've completed our HTML. So let's shift over to the CSS, and then I'm going to press Control B to hide the file tree. And then I'm going to drag VS Code over to the left half of the page, and we'll look at our page here on the right. Now we can see we've added some content, but it is not conforming at all to the size of the screen we have. We need to make some changes in the CSS to apply this correctly to our page. I'm going to press Alt-Z to wrap the code so we can see it all on the window. So if the line is too long, it wraps down to the next line, such as this import from Google Fonts, where we have the Nanito font here. We have our basic reset with a margin of 0, padding of 0, and box sizing, border box. And now I'm going to add to this reset. Something that we covered in the image lesson was adding an image reset where we need it to say display block, and that removes the little space that is by default under images because they are inline elements. But then instead of width 100%, which you would often see here, I just want to say max width of 100%. And that means it will not overflow its container. And at the same time, we need to add a height of auto. Now you'll see many say do not add a height to images. However, we're doing this because we added a height in the HTML to prevent that content layout shift. And that is the new approach. So I recommend following that at this point. And if you don't add the height, it will stick with the height assigned in the HTML, which would be the original 500 pixels. So this height auto then will adjust according to the width as well. So if we save that, we have completed our basic reset now. So we have our asterisk, which selects all elements, and then our image selection here for the full reset we're applying. And we can already see a change. Our images are actually now fitting into the design. Even though the design isn't the way we want things yet, it does look a little better than it did. Okay, we'll scroll for some more room, and I'm going to select this general styles comment, and I want to make another comment in between. And instead of general styles here, I'm going to keep it all caps, and I'll type utility classes. And after that, I'm going to add a utility class, and it's going to be called no wrap. And then inside the no wrap class, we'll choose the white space property. It's white dash space, and there we'll say no wrap. I'm going to use this because Jane has a last name that has a space in it. And we don't want her name to break in half if the text wraps. So let's go back to the HTML, and here's Jane's name in the fig caption, and we'll put a span element with a class of no wrap. And now we still need to scroll over, or I could wrap the code, but since we're only doing this one thing, I'll just scroll. I'm going to collect the closing span that was automatically added and put it after the end of her last name. We'll save that, and you won't really notice a change, but now if the text wraps, it will not break her last name in two. Okay, back to the style CSS. Now we're going to move on to the general styles section, and here we have the font shorthand, which adds a font size and a font family all in one. Then we have a min height of 100 viewport units. We'll keep all of that. I'll get rid of this blank line. We have a fallback background color. And then we have a background image set with a radial gradient, which starts in the center at white smoke and works its way out to this darker color. And then we have display flex and flex direction column. And that is what stacks our header on top of the main, on top of the footer, and keeps it in that order. Okay, after that, we have a section where we applied grid to the header, nav, main, and footer, and we're just going to delete that. So if you are following along with the starter code, go ahead and remove that. If you're following along without it, well, you don't need to do anything there. Now we have the header and the footer positioned sticky because we have the header at the top, the footer at the bottom, and we want them to stay there, especially if the page scrolls. And then a background color of a darker color, and then white smoke for the font color. But what else we would like to add here is a text-align and put center. So we'll go ahead and add that so we can center this text. Okay, just below we have the header with a top of 0, and that keeps the header at the top. Notice we also have a footer down here with a bottom of 0. In between we have the nav and the main. So for the nav, we're going to keep the background color of white. We can remove this color of black for the font color. The padding at 1/2 rem, that's fine. And we still want the 2-pixel border on the bottom. But now let's add some new styles here. Let's put the font-weight and make that bolder. There we go, bolder. And then I'm going to put display flex here. And then we'll say justify content, and we'll space dash evenly to spread out the employee names in this nav menu. And now you can see they are in bold and they are spaced out evenly here in our nav menu. I'm going to scroll up just a little bit more, and after the nav and before the main, we're going to style these links. So let's add nav and then A for the anchor element, and also nav and then A with the visited pseudo class for after a link has been visited. And let's just shift that color back to to the black color that we had before. So when we save, we should see those change to black now. Now after the nav anchor and the anchor visited, we also want to style nav anchor with a hover and nav anchor with a focus. And you might even want to add an active in there, or you might like to see it flash a different color, which is another pseudo class you could do. I'm not doing that one right now, but let's put a color here, and I'll go with HSLA, which you can also, of course, pick by navigating through the Visual Studio Code color picker, but I've already got this picked out. It's 0% here, 20% in the last one, that's easy to remember, and then 0.6 or essentially 60% transparency. And then I'll put the semicolon there at the end and save. Now we're not going to see this in mobile mode because we're not really going to hover, but as we get to a wider design, if we were to show that, we could noticeably see that change as we hovered over. Now if they had focus here, we could possibly see that. So let me tab through. There we see the lighter color as we tab to each of the names. So we can test that in mobile view by tabbing through and setting that focus. Okay, we're ready to style the main element now, so I will scroll up for that. We want to keep that flex grow so it does fill out the page no matter what, but after flex grow we can add a few more things here. So let's put display of flex once again, and then we'll have a flex dash direction, and we'll set that to column. And then we're going to align dash items, and we'll set that to center. Now let's put a gap, which is shorthand essentially for column and row gap. This is going to be 1.5 rem, and a padding of 1 rem. And if we save, we should see some changes. There we do a little bit, so the images aren't to the full edge of the screen, and it moved a few things around for us. But we still have more changes to apply directly to the cards themselves. I'm going to copy the comment we have here for the small media query, and I'm going to create a section for the profile card class. So here I could just switch this from small to profile card, and underneath that we will start to style the card class. So I'll scroll this up as we continue to grow the styles. And here it would be a card class. Now inside this class, one thing I'm going to put is scroll dash margin dash top. And you would have to experiment with this to get the right size. I've played around with it a little bit, and I believe 8 rem is the right size. What this does is when we scroll to Joe or Matt or Jane, when that is scrolled, then it pushes down from the top so it doesn't scroll underneath the header. So you want to have a little margin on the top from the scroll, and this property will do that. After that, let's set a width, and we're going to use the min function. Now the min function says, hey, at a minimum, use this width, and we'll set it to 100% so it can grow to 100% width of the container. But it also takes a max, so it says do not grow any larger than, and we'll put 350 pixels here. So we'll fill out whatever the container is up to 350 pixels, and we can specify all of that in one line for the width if we use the min function. After that, let's go ahead and put another background color for this area of the page, which will be the cards. I'm going to go with CBD5E1 that I'd previously picked out, more of a gray or a lighter gray. And then we can go ahead and put a border, and I'll go 2 pixels solid black. And then let's add a border dash radius, and we'll go 15 pixels here. Let's save that much and see the change. There's some definite change there. Now let's add a padding of 1 rem all the way around, and that changed that up a little bit, so now we have some space in there once again. Now let's add a display of flex for the card itself. The flex direction is going to be column once again, and then we'll also say align items. There it is, and we'll choose center and save. Now something you may notice right away is the employee name didn't center. That's because it's inside the figure. So this paragraph is outside and it became a flex item. However, the fig caption did not become a flex item because it's inside the figure, which is the flex item. So we'll still need to make a change for that. So underneath the card now, we can select the card class and the figure element within, We'll also set it to flex. And then we'll set the flex flow, and that will be columns, so that's column direction. And then it's also the flex wrap property, and we'll set it to no wrap. And if we save, we don't really see a change at this point, but it will be good to have that there. Okay, then let's set the card image element itself. And now we can say border, and let's put a thick border on that, 5 pixels, double, and a flat black with the 333 hexadecimal code. And then a border dash radius of 50% because it's a square, so we can turn it into a circle. And now finally, before we move on to media queries or different sizes, let's add the card fig caption styles. And for the fig caption, we're going to say font dash weight and put bolder. We'll put a font dash size of 2 rem, a margin of 1 rem, and now we need a text align center for that fig caption. And there we have Joe's name in bold and it's centered. And really we're finished with our smallest screen design before we get to our first media query. So we've applied all of the main general styles and then the specific card class styles. And now we have our design here. There's one more thing I would like to add though, because right now if I click on Joe, of course he's right there, if I click on Jane, it just jumps to her automatically. And if you remember, I believe it was our Flexbox lesson, we allowed that to scroll and just have a nice little feature. And we need to add that actually under general styles, but it will be under the HTML element. And there we should put scroll behavior. There it is. And we'll put smooth. Then we can just leave that all on one line, but I would like to put a space between the HTML and the body styles. Oh, and then of course, using Prettier, it auto-formatted it for me. So now with that scroll behavior of smooth, and if I click on Joe, it just scrolls to Joe. And we've got that scroll margin top set, so he didn't stop underneath the header. And then it scrolls to Matt, and it scrolls to Jane, all like it should. Now we're ready to go to our first media query, which is at 576 pixels for the small media query that we have here. Let's go ahead and delete the styles we were using before in the previous lesson that just displayed the changes for us. And let's apply what we're actually going to change. So we'll select the main element, and here we're going to change the justify content, and it's going to be center. And before, if we look at the main element and what we had before, this will overwrite that property. And we didn't have justify content here before, so that's okay. It will be set now when we get to this size. After justify content, we're going to set the flex flow, and it would be row and wrap. So now we do want them to wrap if they will take up more than the width that they have. We'll have 2 rows of profile. And finally, let's switch the padding to 1 rem. And then after the main element, we're going to adjust something about the card class as well. And this will be the width, and the min will still set at 100%, but the max will now let go up to 400 pixels. And then let's rearrange the order so it'll be easier to see our breakpoint. So here we'll take the card and the last child, which would be Jane, and we'll make her first by setting the order to -1. So now let's grab Chrome, I'll make it full screen, and we'll switch over to responsive. And if we do that, we'll drag this down to where we're at 576. Right now we're still not at that breakpoint. So this was our mobile phone that we had, and now we just passed 576, and you can see Jane's at the top. So it just got a little wider. It doesn't change much, but it changes a little bit. We can make the cards a little bit bigger just because of where they're at. And then if we get bigger before the next breakpoint, well, we hit it there, so it didn't wrap yet. But changing the width might allow them to wrap because we did switch that to allow wrap at this size. Okay, I'll bring Chrome back to the right, and now this switched because our width once again switched. But we'll go ahead and tackle the rest of the media queries, and then we'll see the changes at each breakpoint as we go. So now for medium, let's go ahead and remove these styles as well. And here we'll put the nav, And the first thing we'll do is set it to display of none at this point because we're at iPad size and they should all fit on the screen now without scrolling. The next would be a card. Once again, we'll put a width. And as you might guess, we'll use the min function. We'll say 100% again, but now we'll make them smaller so we definitely fit a couple side by side and they all fit on the page. So after that, let's select the card figure element, and there we'll set flex flow, and we'll say column dash reverse. So we'll notice a change there as well in the order that would appear. And then we'll set the card fig caption, and now let's set the margin to very, very small here, 0.1 EM, and then just 0. And maybe we'll want to keep that, maybe we won't. We could play around with that. Then card and the paragraph for the card, I'll leave that a lowercase, and now I'll set that to margin dash top 1 rem. And save. Let's see if we can make this any larger here. So we're at 594. We made our first breakpoint, but we're not making it to the next one unless we make VS Code a little bit bigger again. So we'll drag this over. And now as we get a little larger, there we go. Now let's switch this to the iPad size itself. And you can see they all fit on the page for the iPad. And if we get smaller than that, we're somewhere in between. Maybe a Surface Duo there, we're at 540, so we didn't hit the first breakpoint yet. So it's just kind of a weird spot in between where we are there. But it does work. It's just a little bit larger view of the mobile view as we look at it that way. So now we've covered our first 2 breakpoints as well as our starting point. Let's go ahead and add the third at the large stop, and that's 992 pixels. Let's delete what we had here for the body from the last tutorial. And once again, select the card class. We'll select the width again, and we'll use the min function. We'll say 100% and then 400 pixels here. And if you remember, we made it smaller so it would all fit on an iPad. We were at 325 pixels. So even though previously before that we were at 400 pixels, we need to switch it back because it hits that breakpoint in between. Okay, after the card selection there, let's switch the order around again so we once again know this has changed. So we'll say card, and now we'll say nth child, and we'll select the second child element, and we'll give that an order of -1, and it should switch the order for us again. Those are the only changes we're going to make there. So let's go on to the XL size as well, and we'll select what we have there and delete it from the previous tutorial. We'll select the card class. Now we'll set width again, use the min function, but now I'm going to use a function inside of the min function, and that is the calc function. The calc function is great because it lets us mix other units together, or different units together, I should say. So I'm going to set the width of each card to 33% minus 1 rem. And then we'll have a max of 500 pixels because that is the size the images are. And we don't want the images to get any larger than their original size or they'll start to get blurry. So we'll leave that as the max, but this will allow them to grow dynamically with a percentage value. So let's stop there and save our file. I'll once again take this to the larger screen. Now something else we can do is click the 3 dots here and say show media queries. So now we can see our media queries here. So there's 576, 768. We're only seeing the width. We're not seeing a good height. 992, and finally 1200. So now let's switch this to some sizes we might normally see, such as 1920 by 1080. And then I'll just make this smaller and smaller as we go. Notice we have got Joe's name and Jane's name and Matt's name all on top of their cards now because of that column reverse that we did. So that was a nice change to let us know we have made something different. Now this is using the percentage size that we used with that calc function. So notice how they just gradually get smaller until we're at the next breakpoint, which is 1200. There we go. Now this is at 50%, so it looks a little tiny here, but overall, we're squeezing it down because of these two. But overall, we can see what is happening. And so now they're stacked on top of each other with 2 rows. And now they're stacked on top of each other again, and we're kind of in that larger iPad size, getting a little smaller. Now we're at that larger mobile size, and now we're down to finally underneath 576, which becomes definitely a mobile device. So we really have identified several devices or sizes along the way that we could target, and you could specifically target more than that. One we haven't talked about yet, though, is taking something like an iPhone. I'll go ahead and remove these media queries now. I'll hide them, and turning it horizontal. Right now, this isn't going to work, so let's make some changes for this as well. I'll leave the phone like this and drag VS Code back, and we can make some changes for our final breakpoint, which is the mobile device landscape. Scrolling all the way up here, let's look at this breakpoint. You can see we're selecting a max height of 425 pixels and a minimum aspect ratio of 7:4. So the width would be 7 units and the height would be 4 in comparison. So let's select everything we have here now, except this display none for the nav. We want to keep that. And let's go ahead and put an H1 here with a font-size 1.5 rem. And we can leave that all on one line, but when we save, it will get formatted if we're using Prettier, like I am, that Prettier code extension, or VS Code extension. Now I'll go ahead and put some styles on the main element. We'll go with Flex Flow, which will set the direction to row, and then no wrap, so we should have only one row. Then Justify Content, we'll set this to space evenly. And after that, let's align items. And let's set this to stretch to give them all the same height in case the content would make them different heights. And then we can go ahead and style the card just a little bit. So under here, I'll type the card class, and I'm going to put a width, use the min function, and no, instead of 100% width right away, I'll use that calc function again. I'll say 33%, this time minus 0.25 rem instead of 1 rem. And we'll put the max for any card at 200 pixels. Okay, then we can set something more specific on the card. Let's do the fig caption. Looks like I need to scroll up for some room here, so I'll do that as well. And for the fig caption, let's put the font size 1.25 rem. And then let's go ahead and select the paragraph below. And we could put these on the same line, actually. So let's just go ahead and put a comma here and put .card paragraph. And we're going to go ahead and set that same style on both and save. Okay, now that we've made those changes, let's drag this back over. And then we'll turn our phone horizontally. And we fit all of the cards right in here together, which is nice. Let's see if we could do that in a different size as well. Maybe the iPhone Plus. Yes, it works as well too. It may not work as well in the smallest screen. I have a feeling these will be just a little taller than we would want probably. Let's see. Yeah, they're a little taller, but it's not too bad. You might expect to have to scroll when you have one of the smaller phones, so that wouldn't be really a breaking thing to me, but you could work with that if you really wanted to target this specific device. But overall, for most phones, I believe this would work well in the horizontal mode. So there's some nice changes. You can go back through and tweak a few things. One thing I want to check is that very, very small margin that we set. And let me find what size that was on again, because I wondered if we even needed that or if I was just playing around with that back when I was working with the code. That is such a small margin on the top and bottom, and this is at the iPad size. So let's see what it looks like if I comment this out. I'll select it all, press Shift, Alt, and the letter A. Comments out that code. Bring this over so I can switch to an iPad. And there's the iPad size. And let's make it a little bit bigger so we can see everything. There we go. Yeah, it looks good without it, so I would probably remove that as well. And I'll drag this back over. And then we'll just take this out of the code. And the rest I think I'll leave as is. And of course, you can play around with this. I do not do this perfectly myself. Everything is trial and error basically as you go. So mess around with this code. Don't accept it just the way it is. See what you can change, what you like better one way or the other. Remember to keep striving for progress over perfection. And a little progress every day will go a very long way. Please give this video a like if it's helped you. And thank you for watching and subscribing. You're helping my channel grow. Have a great day, and let's write more code together very soon.